Picnic, a few good people in the park, Burroughs Park as I recall. Someone said, somehow the idea of a balloon rainbow, of a rainbow over the Flint River came up. You, John Kotarski, Patty Perkins in particular, and it seemed like a good idea. I've never been able to resist a good idea or a good person. It's difficult. And we just did it. That's all. We just did it. What would it take? And we talked about that. You knew how to solve certain problems. Patty solved certain problems. I was able to solve other problems. And it happened almost without a hitch, I think. It was pretty miraculous, really.
What I remember about the balloon and the rainbow piece was the sense of expansiveness about it. The idea that these people, Bob and a couple friends of mine from the art department, were working seriously and quietly to make this incredibly, whimsical piece, and taking it so seriously at the same time they understood how whimsical and pretty it was. I mean, was kind of a shock to me. And every time I talked to him or was around it, I was smiling for days. I think I did a few small things to help him, but to see somebody like Kasky, who is the strangest cross between a poet and a holy man and an engineer I've ever met, to see the care and attention with which he attacked this program, but always keeping it kind of light and, well, what do you think we should do next? And not faking those things, just, well, I'm not sure, I'm just another bozo on the bus, what do you think we should do? But you always sense his energy directing it.
And there were new people coming in. There were people who I hadn't met before, people like Dick Cobb, people like Pat Keating, who came in from California, one of the sort of younger generation of surfer beats, as we used to call them, who were really energetic. There was John Kotarski, who was very much involved in kind of conceptual performance, environmental projects that had a social dimension to them. And I think that, along with some of the other things that were happening, bringing in Dennis Oppenheim a couple of years earlier to do a lecture and project in the Mott College Gallery. In fact, the little gallery at Mott really was a nice focal point. Artists that hadn't shown before, like Joe Bomarito, were suddenly now given a place to show. And there was like an intellectual dimension to it. There was a poetry reading that went along with that little show that he had in the Mott Gallery. In the early 80s is precisely when the studios started opening up in the alley, and I forgot totally about that. And which is, I think, probably the most important thing of all, was that suddenly there was an attempt to work in the city, to take advantage of some of the loft spaces and to do bigger work and to do it in a way that was accessible to other artists so that people could exchange ideas, and also accessible to art students so they could come down and see what people were doing. In fact, there were some open houses in those galleries, or excuse me, in those studios, that I think were kind of the precursor, or the sort of set the tone or the stage for the opening of Buckham Gallery.
Well, about Buckham specifically, I'd have to say that was probably Tom Newsom. I think that in the early days, and really up until today, Tom was a very, very central and a very important person in bringing the gallery together. He was active, had a studio on Buckham Alley, and at that time in his life was a active participant in the downtown scene, which included the local art scene. And I think he was meeting and exchanging ideas with a lot of artists locally.
We were sitting around and might have been the Torch, it might have been Hat's Pub, with some of the people that were involved with Art Source in its early stages. I think Ken Hannon, Valerie Clark, and it was suggested that, wow, you know, the alley artists formed a natural sort of group to exhibit. And we thought, well, that's neat. And they said, we're going to have this big building that we're going to do it in. And it'll be Berlin or it'll be Paris. It'll be this, you know, you'll be in on the ground floor. But we quickly realized that the space that finally was becoming available for Art Source was the Robert David Allen building, which, even though I think it was a very good space in many ways, was not what we had in mind for the kind of work that we thought needed exposure that wasn't getting exposed. And this was namely installation art, large-scale paintings, large-scale sculptures, performance art, things that maybe would only be available or only possible in a very attenuated form in the Robert David Allen space. So I don't know whether it was that same evening or shortly afterwards, Gary Gebhardt, who had also a building that he used for studio space, as well as, I think he had just taken over the Torch Bar at that time, said, well, I've got this tenant in the upstairs of my building on 2nd and Buckham.
My tenants upstairs were moving out, and I thought about it, and I really, you know, I went up there and I kept looking at the space and liking the space. And I finally thought to myself, well, I'm gonna gut it, and whether it ends up being my studio or a gallery or what. And I'd talked to Tom about it, and I said it's available if we want to try to do it. And I didn't know if we were going to try to do it for a month for a show, and then I would go to my studio, or 2 months, or how it would evolve. But I thought, well, this is the space. Let's, you know, I'm kind of offering it, you know, like, do we want to try it?
Then we had a big meeting, and there was a lot of excitement, and we decided we would do it, and people signed up, and we quickly wrote bylaws. We got a lawyer to help us become a nonprofit organization, and then it was a lot of physical labor, tearing out ceiling and stripping the walls down in the space at Buckham.
We came in. There was plaster, and there were all kinds of. There were 2x4 walls built all around the brick, and there was a drop ceiling suspended from the trusses, made from 2x6s and lath and plaster. And so we had to get rid of that. I mean, the ceiling is so beautiful, and I mean, there's no way that you couldn't have that exposed. So, I mean, that was one of the first orders of business, was to go up and then to chop this out of it. And it was an incredibly, laborious, dirty, job that was perfect for an 18 or 19-year-old kid. Send Bill up there, he'll do it. He's still young, give him a mask. And so, we took a sawzall and we ran it down the plaster, and we'd knock out a truss or a joist and then do the next one. And it was just real methodical and dirty and hard, and we took a lot of breaks. And but once we got it open, I mean, it was just, it was well worth it, obviously. I mean, this is I think it's one of the best spaces in Michigan for exhibiting.
First show was, I believe, one of the best ideas, and I don't know who came up with it, but I think it was it was a landmark way to start a new gallery, because it took everything that our mission was about, and the show was a metaphor for that. It was about installation. It was about artists from all over. It was about different ideas, different tendencies. It was about multiplicity within one space, and yet a kind of working together. The response as far as the opening was tremendous. There were a lot of people there.
I remember the first show most vividly. I was in it. So, that was for me the first installation piece that I had done and thought of as an installation piece. I don't know that I knew what an installation was exactly. Newsom asked me if I would participate, and I said yes. Will you do an installation? I said yes. So I did what I thought was an installation. And I've been doing them ever since. And people have accepted me as an installation artist, but I had no idea whether that meant something more specific than I had in mind. That show, I certainly owe Buckham more than Buckham would ever owe me. That show started me in a direction that I've been going in for 7 or 8 years now, and it'll probably continue to be a direction that I'll follow. I don't think it would have happened otherwise. Who knows what I would be doing, but I don't think I'd be doing installations, and the character of the work would certainly be different, at this point in time. It was a great show. It was a good show. I don't know if I can remember. Pi Binio was in it. Doug Hoppe was in that show. Sid Atkinson. Yeager was in the show. Jay Yeager. I think Jim Schaefer. My piece was called Circular Ruin. It was based loosely on a short story by Borges, which Tom Newsom introduced to me some years before that, and I've been thinking about for 16 years. And it's about a man whose task was to dream a man alive, to dream a man into existence. That particular thought has occupied my mind from that time to this. Not necessarily dreaming a man alive in the sense that you would think of it, but in the process of doing those shows, I began to realize that I was dreaming myself alive. That the act of making art is an act of self-creation, and that I found myself writing the statement for an installation shortly after that, in which I was saying Borges' protagonist's task was to dream a man alive. Mine is to dream this piece alive. And then I found myself writing the words, and myself in the process. And at that moment, I knew something that I needed to know. I knew something about art that I hadn't been able to verbalize before. I knew something about myself that I hadn't been able to verbalize before. And it's affected my direction from that point forward.
It was so exciting. It was such a high because, as I said before, there was this momentum building up. There was a lot of momentum at Mott, and a lot of people had a lot of good stuff going, and no place to do it. We could have gone to Detroit, but it wouldn't have had the kind of impact and energy that it had to bring it, to your own community, to draw the energy out from the community and then bring it in. And there was a show that I can't remember exactly, but I think Enclaves was one of the first shows, if not the first show, which was an installation, and Bob Caskey was in that, and I remember his piece very vividly because it was in the beginning stages of when he was doing the tarlatan and the metaphorical pieces, the story. I think the piece was based on the Borges story, the Circular Ruin, and there was just a lot of allegory and just a lot of neat things, to look at, and it was very exciting to see that happen in this place, and it was really exciting to see 150 people show up to the opening. coming from, nowhere, where you've been used to, you'd hang around the school and you talk to it. There's a certain amount of, group of people. It was almost incestuous. I mean, it was the same people over and over and over. This, and then all of a sudden, all these other people, their families and friends, and then people from other areas that had heard about the space came to see what was going on. And I think they were excited by it too. I mean, I think there's been some really, really good energy go through here. Overall, it's been a great addition to the community. The performance was very exciting to me because as I say, I'd gotten into three-dimensional work, and then I'd met some people, you or John Kotarski, who helped me steer me into this whole thing with language and performance, the voice, poetry, and that was just that was awesome. And so he and I got together and put together this Christmas with Cummings performance, which ended up being like a 3-act piece. We did a ballet, there was a recital, and there was a play, reality play, Santa Claus, I think it was called. I can't remember now. But U of M Theater was involved in it, and John and I, and what a turnout we had for that too. I got involved in another project with John down on the riverfront, which was totally spur of the moment, and it was another one of these, I had an idea, and I came and talked to him in his shop, and then all of a sudden it developed into another idea, and then all of a sudden it was a very plausible idea and a really great idea. And we came to the gallery and asked them to sort of sponsor us so that we could go to the DDA, as Buckham Fine Arts Project instead of, Bill and John, and there used to be this thing down on the riverfront, Art on the Riverfront, and they had a space open on the bridge on Saginaw Street, and both John and I lived downtown, John longer than I, but we both lived down in the downtown area, and I watched the buildings, just get ripped out, and it was a sad experience. I mean, to see this sort of, I mean, you get used to seeing buildings, and it's like a person, and you walk around it, and there's a personality to every building. I mean, there's one down here now, I think it's out of plumb. I mean, you look at it, and I swear that every day you go by it, it's just a little bit out of, plumb, and there's some meaning to that. And people that work in it, there was some meaning to them. And here they were ripping them out, and there was no response to that. I mean, there were articles in the paper, but there needed to be some kind of we thought some kind of a ritual to, so that people could experience that and somehow, and have it be real for them. And so we came up with this idea of building a wall across this street, which pointed to the Sill building, and everyone would come, and whoever was there could participate for free. And they came, and they could write their name on a brick, or they could color in some little design or whatever, and then we would mortar in that piece into this assemblage, into this wall, which became just this incredibly powerful image of this. Here was this brick. I mean, there was the power of the bricks there, but there was also this added energy, because people would come up and they would talk with us and tell us a little bit about their families or whatever, and this is their name. They'd laugh, and then they'd want to talk about the downtown. They can't believe what they're doing, and so then you'd have that memory put into this wall, and all these memories and all these people. And after, I think it was a 2 or 3 day thing, and after that 2 or 3 days, it was unbelievable. Of course, then at the third day, then we tore it down. We knocked it down, and we had whoever was there, participate in that too. And then that was another experience. But it was it was a catharsis, a way to experience that, firsthand. And I think that it was, and that's one of the best experiences that I've had as an artist, because it engaged such a wide, band of people. I mean, my attitude is sometimes, this art it serves the wealthy, and you don't see many people from the State Streets come over here for an opening. But there we were, right on the street, and anybody who was there, it didn't matter, and they could all participate. There was no prerequisite, and nobody felt uncomfortable in participating with us. And in that way, it was more like, I guess, maybe more like theater in that way. But everyone was, interactive theater. Everyone was welcome.
The artist member originally founded the gallery. The gallery was artist member driven, and that the artist members were the governing body of the gallery. They put it together, built the gallery, built the space. The owner of the building, Gary Gebhardt, was a artist member, founding member. So in one sense, from the beginning, the artist members were the whole kit and caboodle. Everything was pretty much artist member driven. Executive director is his duties, and that job is just expanded into executive director. Joe Matuzik, he runs the gallery.
Basically, Buckham has been kind of at a turning point. Originally, when an organization comes together like Buckham, there is a great pooling of energy. It's sort of a Spanky and our gang kind of, hey, let's put on a play kind of thing. And there's a lot of energy that's generated that way, and that's how Buckham was. You had a bunch of artists who got together, who involved other artists, who made something happen. After a certain point, the initial energy behind that can start to wane a little bit. And it can get tiring to always have to be there and do the painting, always have to be there and put out announcements, always have to be there and manipulate the mailing list. And organizations like Buckham come to a certain point where they have to say, okay, how do we keep that energy going? How do we not burn out interested people? And what tends to burn people out is not the interesting stuff of putting shows together, of deciding what's going to happen, of being part of that artistic process. What really gets to people is the really mundane, day-to-day answering letters, manipulating a mailing list, begging for money. My title is executive director. My duties are basically everything that needs to get done that someone else won't do, which involves a fair range. My job description basically says he will get it done. Well, Buckham has a couple of advantages when you look at the alternative space movement. One is it's purely and simply one of the most beautiful galleries in the state, and that's widely acknowledged. The kind of space that's available, basically a 40 by 60 square foot space with a cathedral type ceiling, square ceiling, wood floors, wood ceilings. The space itself is just gorgeous, and artists from all over the state, all over the country, really, the Midwest mostly, just love to show their work here because it really shows it off. That's a little unusual. Because traditionally, organizations like Buckham are hand-to-mouth organizations that are done out of somebody's pocket, that are barely able to keep their head above water. And not that Buckham is any different necessarily in that sense. But that means that a lot of these organizations are put in smaller places where the rent is cheaper, where they don't have to, the overhead is lower, and consequently you don't have the opportunity to stand back 20 feet from something and look at it without tripping over something else. In that sense, Buckham is very, very unique. I think Buckham is really important for the Flint community because it represents the kind of organization that can easily react to change and can represent change. Particularly in this community, change is the one constant factor. And on an arts level, an organization, some of the larger organizations may take time to react because they're booked way in advance, because they don't have the resources in the community to have that community talk to them. We're easy to get a hold of, we're approachable. And Buckham's role in this community is a very interesting one, I think. Ideally, we'd like to see about 5 more organizations exactly like us so that there would be an energy field that would be generated, a lot of activity, a lot of things happening. There's simply not that kind of structure here in the Flint area. Other organizations, Chicago, New York, Washington, have more of that kind of thing where artists can go back and forth. To a certain extent, Buckham is the only organization that does this kind of thing here, and that has its pluses and its minuses. For the community, I would
hope that we would be seen as a resource, as a way of keeping the community in touch with just what's happening now out there. You know, if there's some sort of controversy going on in the arts, we expect to be part of it. We expect to be reflecting it so that we can explain to the community, these are the issues that are being discussed. This is why this is going on. This is why this is important to think about. We like to see ourselves as a place where dialogue can begin and continue. I think that's Buckham's role. There's a spectrum of arts experience and cultural experience available. The Flint Institute of Arts represents a good solid portion of that spectrum. You have other portions represented at Left Bank Gallery or the Flint Public Library or Citizens Bank with the shows that are done by the Greater Flint Arts Council. Buckham represents a different portion of that spectrum and therefore is as important because, I mean, what color do you want to throw out of the rainbow? I mean, we're part of that color and we represent an area of the spectrum that if Buckham was not here would not otherwise be represented.